Alright, I got my stitches out so I can get back out in the garage and start working. Putting the digital dash on the back until I get some more components. I'm trying to finish up the coolant system and specifically the AC part of it. So these are the hoses I routed to the back to the engine. Went online, looked in the manuals, determined that this bottom black pipe goes to the water pump, and the silver top pipe is returned from the heater, or excuse me, supplied to the heater, returned from the heater to the water pump. That's important with the resto mod system. So I then stuck an air hose in one of those and let it blow air through so I can identify them. The one with green tape is the one that goes to the water pump. That's the one that resto mod air is so particular about you making sure you get right. So they route over the engine, down the side, come through the frame rail there. I've got some 5/8 90 degrees on them, and I'm getting ready to put this valve on. One with the green tape obviously is the one that they're so concerned with. It goes on this port. I made sure I memorized that before I pulled the tape off. It goes on the one that's straight through. And then those are obviously going to go into the bulkhead right there and then back through to this side. So getting stepless clamps on it all. I'm getting it all ready to go. Get it all tied up. We're going to try and use the vacuum system that I borrowed from a GTR builder. Try and pull a vacuum on the coolant system and get all the air out and fill it up properly. Alright, I got the valve installed per the resto mod air instructions. This is their upgraded 4-way valve. If I forgot to mention it, somewhere over here I've got the 3-way valve that came with the system that I'm not using. So this is the valve that came with the stock system. It's got one in and one out. And so it cuts off water to the motor from the heater core when you turn on the air conditioning and turn off the heater. The Subaru motor can't handle that. So this is the 4-way valve. It's got obviously 2 in and out from the heater and 2 in and out to the motor. Whereas this one, you have one that always ran from the heater core to the return, and then it had a cutoff between the supply and, or excuse me, the supply was always hot, or the supply was always on, had no valve in it, and then return from the heater core to the water pump was shut off. Subaru motor can't handle that, it'll overheat. So 4-way valve, it always supplies water to the motor and only shuts off water supply to the heater core. So come out of the heater core there, through the bulkheads, out of the bulkheads, down to the valve, to the 90s, under the frame, under the coolant pipes down there. I'm hanging low, I'll get them all secured. Come up the firewall, down the frame, over the transmission, and into where they go. So should all be leak free right now. Or it should all be closed up anyway. I won't say it's leak free. The entire system is closed and plumbed, so I'm fixing to drain what water is in there, and then we'll go with the big boy here. Maybe we'll get a little bit of that on video. Alright, so I spent all night last night messing with this vacuum coolant system, and the orifice must be plugged because I can turn it on here and put my finger over the port. It'll only pull a tiny bit of vacuum. So I've put some JB Weld on it. Any place I thought it was leaking, I've tried to take it apart and clean the orifices, and it's just not working. So I ventured out with gloves and a mask on to Harbor Freight so that I could pick up the Harbor Freight kit. We'll see how that does. So I had gotten the pressure tester set up here. and was looking through the directions to make sure I knew where all the connections goes, and it started talking about having to turn the ignition on but not the motor, and setting your heater to full to make sure your heater valve is open. I realized that I had not addressed that at all. I have no idea what position that valve is in. And so there was a high probability that that valve was shipped closed, and it's closed. And if I were to pull a vacuum on this and fill it up, heater core would still be full of air, and it's the first time I turn on the heater, I'd dump all that air into the system. So I obviously don't want to take the time to wire up the entire AC system right now, so I just kind of set some stuff up on the bench. There's the ECU, the valve, the wire that goes over to the, I say ECU, that's the electronic control unit for the air conditioner, not the engine control unit. So orange valve goes over to the regulator, green valves go off to the potentiometers, and then the rub valve goes off into this mess of wiring, which I traced through the wiring diagrams and basically figured out the black one coming right off of it is ground, and then the green wire on this port is the power that feeds it. So I just got a little 12-volt power supply for a laptop here. I don't need a lot of power to run this. Just kind of shoved it up in there, positive there, ground there. And so let's see, that valve is closed. You can't see through there. And then if I turn this knob on the potentiometer right here, valve opens up, closed, open. So this wire with purple wires. So I'm gonna put the knob in the closed position. This is the spare valve I had. This is the two-way, not the four-way. Fixing to move this orange wire over to the four-way valve that's on the car, and make sure that valve's open. It's going. We'll see how long it takes to draw down. Hopefully it'll draw all the way down. If it doesn't, then I got a leak. So we're starting to pull the vacuum on the system. You can see the hoses collapsing. It's supposed to pull all the way down to 25, but it's really struggling, so I may have a leak somewhere. So I'm sort of walking around and checking things, I guess. Well, if I shut this off and it loses vacuum, I know I got a leak. Definitely have a leak. I can also hear water bubbling and gurgling, which is not good because the water will boil while you're trying to pull a vacuum. And that may actually, I may not have a leak, it may be the water boiling in the system. So I'll push the car outside so that I could drain some more water. As you can see, a lot of water drained out. I removed the the thermostat cap again. Lifted the front as high as I could, let it all drain out, put my shop vac to it, sucked everything I could out, dropped the front down, picked the back up to try and drain everything out of the motor, put the shop vac on that, sucked everything I could out, tightened it all up, put it back up in the air, and tried to draw a vacuum on it again, and I still couldn't draw a vacuum. So I had this other kit that the vacuum system wasn't working, but it also had a pressure tester on it. The problem is trying to pressure up an entire coolant system with a hand pump is nearly impossible. So I hooked it up to the air compressor at 15 psi and just filled the whole thing up with air. And I was able to realize that pretty much, hope you guys enjoyed that trip. Pretty much every fitting down here around the valve is leaking. So I think I've got them all sealed up now. So take the air off of it, put the vacuum back on it, and see if we can pull a vacuum. Now we got something going on. We're trying to 15 real quick, or suck down to 15 real quick, and it's been slowly sinking ever since. So I'm going to see how far it'll go. I'm hoping to get to minus 25. We'll shut the valve off and see if it holds. So it never pulled all the way down. If I close the valve, You can see it'll start dropping. So I definitely got a leak somewhere. So I'm fixing to put the pressure system back on it and go around it with some soapy water and spray all the connections and see if I can find the leak. So I had not gotten on it on both sides and cranked hard enough. It's really hard to get that top one because I got it too close to those two metal frame rails there. So I knocked all anodizing off of it, but I think it's tight. This thing sucked down to 27. I held it at 27 for 6 minutes. I shut it off and we're gonna see how far it drops. I wouldn't be surprised if it drops a little bit because I know there's still some water in the system. But if it drops below 20, then I've probably got a leak I gotta keep looking for. But it's, at least it pulled all the way down. Appears to be pretty good. I hear it leaking right there at the thing, so it could be that the weight of this is causing it to leak a little bit. So shut it off and see how far it drops over 5 minutes. And after I shut the camera down and everything got quiet and I could hear what was going on, I could hear that this tube was leaking real bad. That's where most of my vacuum was leaking out at. Put a bigger bolt in it, put 2 bolts on it, and it's mostly stopped. It's still got a tiny leak. I was also able to hear that that T-bolt there, T-bolt clamp was leaking, and that one had a tiny leak. So I think my only leak left is right here, and it's a small one. So I prepared a bucket with a gallon of antifreeze and 3 gallons of distilled water. That's a 25% mix. That's completely sufficient for Houston, Texas. We don't have to run 50-50 here. So I'm fixing to open this vacuum valve and fill the system up. Sucking that stuff on up in there. No idea how long this is going to take. Hoses are still perfectly flat. I guess the radiator probably fills up first. Once the radiator gets full, the hoses and the block will start filling up. Got an extra gallon of water here if it starts to get low. I don't think it'll take 5 gallons, but if it does, I've got it available. 20% mix would still be more than sufficient for Houston weather. We get maybe 2 days a year below 32 degrees, never for more than 12 hours. And as you guys noticed, I got the car back up in the air. I made sure that this was the highest point in the system while I was filling it. So really starting to slow down now. Still got at least a gallon in the bucket. Hoses are still flat though. I guess they'll be the last things to puff up. So it feels like it's done. Coolant's draining back down the hose on this side, but that hose is still flat. A little interesting. hose just puffed up. I guess the last of the vacuum bled off. So I'm going to take this off now. The radiator should be mostly full. The suction off, and you can see that the radiator's mostly full. Needs a couple inches in the top to fill it up, and should be good to go, I hope. Top it off and drop the engine down and put it out in the driveway and run it and see if it'll cool off. Heat up and cool off, heat up and cool off. It's been several hours since the last little clip. It beautifully sucked in all the coolant. So I put it on the ground to start it up and let it heat up and cool down, and it wouldn't start. My immobilizer was complaining. I was getting the security light on the dash, even though I hadn't touched anything. I ripped it all loose and checked all the wiring. Everything was tight. Threw the disconnect and reconnect about 5 or 6 times, and after 5 or 6 times, the security light went away. So I have no idea what the hell is wrong with the immobilizer. I'm gonna have to get on the ROM Raiders forum and see if somebody, they have a policy that you can't talk about disabling the immobilizer, but maybe somebody will just offer to let me mail them my ECU and they can disable my immobilizer, because A, it's nuts to have an immobilizer on a 15-year-old engine. B, it's obviously not working. I've got the factory immobilizer box hanging right there. I've got the factory key inside the factory antenna, and it's all talking to the factory ECU and just occasionally won't work. So it finally started working. I cranked it up, the car heated up to 205, the fan came on, and it just kept heating and kept heating. The radiator was ambient, 60 degrees. The thermostat housing was about 130 degrees, and the top of the engine was 220 degrees when I shut it down. So I have absolutely no clue, unless there's a blockage in the engine, or the water pump flat out isn't spinning. I just have no clue. But I have a feeling the engine's going to have to come out to figure out whatever it is, which I really am not looking forward to. I was hoping this motor was in. If I start taking the motor apart, then I'm going to have typical project scope creep. I might as well rebuild it and beef it up and put an extra 150 horsepower in it. So really don't want to pull the motor out, because otherwise the cost and the time will just spiral out of control. That's what always happens. So I've asked the guys on the forum for some input, because I'm completely stumped. In the meantime, I'm going to get back to wiring. Now that I have the cruise control switch, the light switch, the wiper switch all in the car where it needs to be, I can clean up all this wiring that goes around the dash and down the center console. So that's what I'm going to start working on next. I'm just going to step away from the cooling system and see if somebody else has a good idea or something comes to me in my sleep. So the immobilizer's been behaving. I've been cleaning up wiring, although that has nothing to do with the immobilizer behaving. That's just random. But since it was behaving, I decided to do some more troubleshooting on the overheating problem. Last video I made where I was talking about the overheating problem, or possibly it's still this video, just another clip in it, because I haven't posted that video yet, but whatever. Earlier I said I had no clue what was going on, and I'm still pretty stumped, but I have learned some more. I'm used to a car where the thermostat is on the exit from the block headed to the radiator, so it prevents hot water from leaving the block and going to the radiator. So that as the engine block heats up, the water inside the block heats up, it pushes against the thermostat, and then as the thermostat warms up, it opens and lets the water past it to the radiator. On the Subaru, the thermostat is on the inlet to the water pump. This is coming from the radiator here. It's right there on the bottom where this hose meets the engine block, so it's preventing the cold water from getting to the engine. So without any circulation, the only way for that thermostat to get hot enough to open is for the block to heat up and have conductive heat transfer back down to it, with cold water pushing on the other side of it until it warms up enough to open up. And that clearly wasn't happening for me. The thermostat was never opening. I pulled the thermostat out and just put a blank, well, I didn't put a blank in there. I put a little piece of metal with a hole in it to hold the seal in place, because the seal goes on the thermostat. But I'm effectively running the thermostat, and it takes forever to heat up, but it cools down wonderfully. So the issue is that my thermostat is not getting hot enough to open. So the question is, how should that happen? My understanding is there's a few ways that should happen. I doubt I can get a picture of it, but down here where the thermostat housing is, you've got the supply from the radiator comes into this side of it, and then you've got your thermostat, and then you've got two hoses coming in from the side. One of those is this hose here that comes from the heater block, or the heater core, and that is a hose that runs to the heater core. So the primary way the car should heat up the thermostat is to push water. The water pump should be able to push water out of the block through this hose into the heater core and back, and then that hot water that went through the heater core should come down and hit the thermostat. I've verified. I took these two hoses off, hooked some water up to the top one with a hose, turned it on, and it went all the way through and came all the way back out the bottom hose. So I know I've got a clear path all the way to the heater core and back. So I don't know why that's not warming up my thermostat. The other way the thermostat can warm up is there is, coming out of the degas tank here, which should get full of hot water because it's sitting right on top of the engine, is a hose that runs out the bottom of it and back to the thermostat housing. So this degas tank and the heater should both be putting hot water into the thermostat housing right behind the thermostat, so that the water pump can then suck it back up and circulate it around the engine. I used an air compressor to blow that line all the way through to the thermostat housing. I know that line on the degas tank is clear. I know that these two lines are clear. I pulled the line going to the heater core off, cranked the engine up, and the engine pumped plenty of water out of that pipe. So it should be circulating hot water to the heater core and back to the thermostat. I still don't know why the thermostat won't open. For right now, there's no thermostat in there, and the car works. I have to solve the thermostat issue. I'm not going to run a car without a thermostat. But until the coronavirus lockdown is over and it's easier for me to order parts and go see people and stuff like that, I think I'm going to leave it alone for right now. I want to be able to get it aligned, and I can't get it aligned if it's overheating, so I think I'm going to leave that alone until I get it aligned. I'm going to focus on some other things, discuss more with the people on the Subaru forums who understand more about these motors, and try and figure out what could be causing it to overheat. So that's where I am on the overheating situation. It's not overheating because I've removed the thermostat. The thermostat is not installed backwards. I've had a lot of people ask me that. I've shown the picture of how it's installed to a dozen people, and they all say it's installed correctly. Hopefully, if I'm building the car, I know how to install a thermostat. I'll also check the thermostat on the stove with some hot water. It opens fine. So the problem is not that the thermostat is bad. It's not that the thermostat's installed backwards. It's that it's obviously not getting hot water to it to open it up, and I'm not too sure why. The other issue I'm having with the coolant system, and this is a brand new issue that happened about 3 minutes before I started this video. The studs that I had bonded on to hold the radiator in place have come off. So obviously the epoxy I used, which was the JB Weld Clear, isn't sufficient to this task. So I'm going to give up on the epoxy, and the little studs they're nice because they provide an isolation. But now I'm not gonna say I'm gonna give up on the studs, but I'm gonna give up on the epoxy. I will either have to find a way to bolt the studs into that little lip there, or come up with some other way to mount this radiator. So not too sure exactly what I'm gonna do yet, but we'll find out.